If you can fix this engine, the CEO said with a smile sharp enough to cut, I'll marry you. The room exploded with laughter. Executives in tailored suits leaned back in their chairs. Phones came out. Someone whispered, "This should be good." The black mechanic didn't laugh. He stood there in oil-stained coveralls, hands still, eyes fixed on the open engine like it was speaking a language only he understood. This wasn't the first time he'd been underestimated. It was just the first time it happened in front of people who believed money was the same thing as intelligence. The CEO waved a hand dismissively. "Go on," she said. "Show us your magic." What no one in that room knew, what they were about to learn the hard way, was that the engine in front of them had already been misdiagnosed 3 times, and that the man they were mocking had built one just like it from scrap when he was 19. As he stepped forward, the laughter faded. Because confidence doesn't shout, and real brilliance doesn't ask for permission. If you've ever been underestimated or laughed at, hit like and subscribe. This story is for you. The laughter came first. Not loud at the beginning, just a few sharp bursts that echoed off the glass walls of the luxury showroom. Then more voices joined in, richer, smoother, practiced laughs from people who were used to being entertained by other people's discomfort. Elijah Carter stood near the open engine bay, hands at his sides, oil stains dark against the gray of his coveralls. He hadn't said a word yet. He hadn't even looked up. The engine in front of him belonged to a prototype worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. Sleek, complex, untouchable. It had humiliated 3 senior engineers already, each one leaving the room red-faced, blaming software glitches, manufacturing tolerances, or the limitations of current design. None of them had fixed it. That was why Elijah was here, not because they believed in him, but because they had run out of options. Across the room, the CEO leaned casually against a polished glass table, one heel lifted, arms folded, like this was all mild entertainment. Her suit was flawless. Not a wrinkle, not a speck of dust. Power sat on her shoulders as naturally as the fabric. She smiled, and it wasn't kind. "Well," she said, glancing at the executives seated behind her, "this is the miracle worker everyone's been whispering about." A few people snorted. Phones came out. Someone muttered, "This should be good." Elijah felt it all, the weight of eyes, the judgment, the silent assumptions. He had learned long ago how to stand inside moments like this without flinching. You didn't survive years of being underestimated if you reacted to every insult. The CEO tilted her head, studying him openly now, his clothes, his boots, the grease beneath his fingernails. Then she laughed again. "If you can fix this engine," she said lightly, waving a manicured hand toward the exposed machinery, "I'll marry you." The room erupted, full laughter now, unrestrained, comfortable. This was their world, where humiliation could be passed off as humor, where power meant never having to apologize. Elijah's jaw tightened. Not because of the joke, but because of the certainty behind it. She wasn't afraid he might succeed. She wasn't worried he might embarrass her. The challenge wasn't real to her. It was theater, a spectacle, something to enjoy before the inevitable failure that would confirm everything she already believed. He had been that spectacle before. At job interviews where his resume was skimmed and dismissed. At conferences where his questions were ignored until someone else repeated them. At garages where customers asked to speak to the real mechanic. He had learned to swallow his pride. Learned when silence was safer than speaking. But this time was different, because the engine wasn't laughing. Elijah stepped closer, placing one hand on the edge of the engine bay. The metal was cool, still, waiting. The laughter began to taper as people noticed he hadn't walked away. The CEO raised an eyebrow. "Well," she asked, "are you going to try, or do you need permission?" A few more chuckles. Someone whispered, "He won't even know where to start." Elijah finally looked up, not at her, at the engine. His eyes traced the components slowly, methodically. Fuel line, intake, control unit, mounts. His breathing evened out, the noise of the room dulling into a distant hum. For the first time since he walked in, he spoke. "I'll take a look," he said. That was it. No attitude, no bravado, just a statement. The CEO laughed again, but there was a flicker, something quick and unguarded, that crossed her face. Surprise, maybe, or irritation that he hadn't played his part. "Be my guest," she said, stepping aside. "Let's all enjoy the show." Elijah rolled his shoulders once, then reached for a flashlight from his pocket. As he leaned in, the laughter behind him softened, not because they respected him, but because anticipation had replaced mockery. They wanted to see him fail. They wanted proof. What none of them knew, what no one had bothered to ask, was that Elijah had seen this engine before. Not this exact one, not with this logo stamped on it, but its cousin. A stripped-down version he'd rebuilt years ago in a cramped garage with borrowed tools and salvaged parts. He moved closer, listening now. Not with his ears, with his instincts. Something was wrong, not broken, not defective, misunderstood. Elijah straightened slowly. The room had gone quieter without anyone noticing. The CEO checked her watch, impatient. "Find something interesting?" she asked. Elijah met her eyes for the first time. "Yes," he said calmly. A few executives shifted in their seats. The CEO smiled again, but this time it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good," she replied, "because I'd hate for this to be boring." Elijah turned back to the engine, already reaching for his tools. Behind him, the laughter stopped. Elijah had learned, early in life, that silence was a kind of armor. It started in a one-room garage behind his mother's rented house, where rusted engine parts lay scattered like broken bones. The neighbors called it junk. Elijah called it possibility. At 12, he could tell the difference between a seized bearing and a faulty valve just by sound. At 14, he rebuilt his first engine from scrap. No manuals, no internet, just patience and instinct. People never believed that part. They saw his hands, scarred, calloused, permanently marked by oil, and assumed brute work, not brilliance. Teachers praised his effort instead of his intelligence. Customers asked if someone else could double-check his work. Employers smiled politely, then hired men who looked more like what success was supposed to look like. Elijah learned not to argue. Arguing required people who were listening, so when the CEO's laughter washed over him in the showroom, it didn't sting the way it might have once. He'd stood in rooms colder than this, facing judgments heavier than a joke disguised as a dare. What unsettled him wasn't the mockery, it was the engine. As he leaned over it now, memories crept in uninvited. Nights in that old garage when the power went out and he worked by flashlight, tracing fuel lines with his fingertips. The way engines spoke when you gave them time. The hum that told you balance was off. The pause that meant timing, not force. He'd been 19 when he built the stripped-down prototype that haunted his thoughts now. A friend of a friend had brought him a design sketch, ambitious, elegant, flawed. Elijah had fixed it not by adding parts, but by removing the assumption that more complexity meant more intelligence. That engine had run beautifully, and then the investor took the credit. Elijah didn't fight it. He never did. He took his tools and moved on, telling himself that work spoke louder than recognition. That skill would always find its way to daylight. Standing in the showroom, he wondered if that belief had been naive. The engine before him was pristine, too pristine. Every component looked perfect, calibrated, aligned. No visible cracks, no leaks, no errors flagged by diagnostics. It was the kind of machine that embarrassed you because it should work. That was the clue. Elijah rested his palm lightly on the housing and closed his eyes for a brief second. He pictured the engine under load, imagined the vibration, the rhythm. Something felt wrong. not broken but constrained, like a runner forced to breathe through a straw. Behind him, whispers fluttered. He hasn't even touched anything yet. Is he praying? Give it 5 minutes. The CEO paced slowly, heels clicking against the floor, the sound sharp and deliberate. Elijah could feel her impatience like static in the air. He knew that look, the one people wore when they expected a performance and feared a delay. He ignored it. Instead, he traced the engine's assembly path in his mind, where decisions had been made, where someone had chosen symmetry over function, where pride had overridden restraint. That was the real failure point. Elijah opened his eyes and reached for the flashlight again, angling it deeper into the housing. The beam caught something subtle, a tolerance so tight it looked intentional, beautiful, fatal. His breath slowed. This wasn't incompetence. This was ego. A memory surfaced. His old mentor, Mr. Dawkins, leaning against a workbench with a cigarette dangling from his lips. Engines fail when people stop listening to them, he'd said. Same as men. Elijah straightened slightly, the realization settling into place. The engine wasn't broken. It was over-designed, choked by perfection. He glanced over his shoulder, briefly scanning the faces behind him. Executives with folded arms, engineers with guarded expressions, phones hovering, ready to capture embarrassment. No one had asked him where he learned. No one had asked what he saw. No one had asked why he'd agreed to the challenge. They'd only asked if he could entertain them. Elijah turned back to the engine. He knew what needed to be done, but he also knew it wouldn't look impressive at first. It would look wrong, reckless, like sabotage to people who believed complexity equaled genius. His fingers hovered over a section no one else had dared to touch. The CEO stopped pacing. You finding something? She asked, voice light but sharp. Or should we call the next expert? Elijah didn't answer immediately. He adjusted the flashlight, confirming what his instincts already knew. The solution wasn't loud. It wouldn't make a show. It would take nerve, because undoing someone else's pride always did. Finally, he spoke. I'll need a different tool, he said calmly. A ripple moved through the room. The CEO raised an eyebrow, amusement creeping back into her smile. Different how? Elijah named it. The engineers stiffened. One of them muttered, That makes no sense. The CEO laughed softly, tilting her head as if indulging a child. Well, she said, gesturing toward the tool cart, let's see how creative this gets. Elijah stepped forward, reaching for the tool with steady hands. Behind him, the room leaned in, not to help him succeed, but to witness the moment he failed. What they didn't realize was that the real test hadn't started with the engine. It had started with whether anyone was brave enough to let the truth look simple. The engine had a reputation, not the kind printed in glossy brochures or whispered during investor tours, but the kind that spread quietly among engineers, the way a bad dream does. It had embarrassed people with degrees framed on their walls, sent senior specialists out of the room muttering excuses. It had turned confidence into caution. Elijah could feel it humming beneath the silence. The showroom lights glinted off polished metal as he leaned closer, his flashlight carving narrow paths through the engine's depths. Every component was immaculate, every bolt torqued to perfection. It was the kind of machine designed to impress people who didn't understand it. Behind him, the engineers had gathered into a loose cluster, voices low but sharp. It's the software, one said too quickly. No, another snapped. We ran diagnostics twice. It's mechanical. You're both wrong, a third cut in. It's thermal expansion. The tolerances... Elijah tuned them out. Arguments were noise. Engines were language. He listened instead to what the machine wasn't saying. No rattling, no uneven wear, no signs of stress where stress should have left scars. That absence told him more than any data readout. The CEO crossed her arms, watching him with a smile that had sharpened into impatience. You've been very quiet, she said. That usually means someone's stuck. A ripple of amusement followed her words. Elijah didn't respond. He angled the flashlight again, following the fuel line to its junction, then down to the housing where symmetry reigned supreme. Too perfect, too proud. Whoever designed this had trusted math more than motion. He reached out and tapped a section lightly with his knuckle. The sound was wrong, not hollow, not solid, restricted. Elijah straightened, his mind assembling the picture. The engine wasn't failing because something was broken. It was failing because something had been protected, shielded from flexibility, boxed into compliance. Impossible, one engineer muttered when Elijah's fingers hovered over a sealed assembly. That section is isolated. We triple-checked it. Elijah glanced back, finally acknowledging them. That's the problem. A few heads turned, a few brows furrowed. The CEO laughed softly. Careful, she said. You're about to explain why everyone else here missed something obvious. I'm about to explain why everyone else here trusted the design too much, Elijah replied, still calm. The laughter thinned, not gone, but strained. He crouched slightly, peering at the alignment from a different angle. Under load, this engine would heat unevenly. The tolerances, celebrated as precision, would turn into restraints. Expansion would fight symmetry. Power would choke itself. He'd seen this before. Not in a lab like this, but in a garage where mistakes didn't get rebranded as innovation. Elijah reached for a wrench, then paused. No, he said quietly. Not that. The CEO's heel tapped once against the floor. What are you waiting for? A tool you don't use on something you want to look perfect, Elijah answered. The room leaned in. Which is, the CEO asked, her smile back, but brittle now. Elijah named it. The effect was immediate. One engineer actually laughed. Another swore under his breath. Someone near the back whispered, "He can't be serious." That tool is for adjustments, the CEO said, voice cool. Not for prototypes. It's for movement, Elijah corrected. This engine needs room to breathe. An engineer stepped forward, agitation breaking through his professionalism. You touch that section, and you'll void the entire assumption that perfection doesn't fail, Elijah finished. Silence fell in patches, spreading unevenly. The CEO studied him for a long moment, eyes narrowing, not with anger, but calculation. This wasn't going the way she'd expected. It wasn't entertaining anymore. Finally, she shrugged. Do it, she said lightly. If you're going to fail, at least do it decisively. Elijah nodded once. He retrieved the tool, its weight, familiar in his hand. As he returned to the engine, the room seemed to hold its breath. Not out of hope, but anticipation of collapse. He loosened a component by fractions so small they were almost insulting to watch. No dramatic dismantling, no sparks, just restraint being eased. Is that it? Someone scoffed. Elijah didn't answer. He made another adjustment, then another, each one deliberate, each one undoing a decision made by someone who believed complexity was safety. The CEO checked her watch again. We don't have all day. Elijah stepped back. Let's try it. An engineer hesitated, then nodded. The ignition sequence began. For a split second, the engine coughed. Laughter burst out, too fast, too relieved. Of course, someone said. I told you. The engine sputtered, then died. The laughter swelled, louder now, triumphant. The CEO smiled broadly. Well, she said, clapping once. That was... I'm not finished, Elijah said calmly. The room froze. He stepped forward again, eyes narrowed, not in frustration, but focus. The first attempt had confirmed his theory. The engine had responded, briefly, like lungs taking their first real breath. He made one final, almost invisible adjustment. Then he straightened. Now, he said quietly. The laughter faded, uncertainty creeping in to replace it. The engine waited, and so did the room. The room didn't laugh this time, not right away. The sound that followed Elijah's quiet now was something thinner, Hesitation. A few people shifted in their seats. One executive cleared his throat as if noise alone might restore confidence. The engineers stared at the engine, then at Elijah, then at each other. The certainty was cracking. The CEO's smile stayed in place, but it had lost its ease. It was the kind of smile people wore when they sensed control slipping, but weren't ready to admit it. She motioned sharply toward the ignition. "Go on," she said. "Let's finish this." The engineer at the console hesitated just long enough to notice. Then he initiated the sequence again. The engine turned. Once. Twice. It caught, briefly, long enough for a few gasps to slip out. And then it failed. Laughter erupted again, louder than before, too loud. The kind that rushed in to cover discomfort. "There it is," someone said. "Told you. You almost had us." The CEO exhaled, relief smoothing her expression. "Well," she said, spreading her hands, "that was an impressive attempt, creative, even. But let's not pretend." Elijah didn't move. He stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on the engine, listening. Not to the room, not to the laughter, to the machine as it cooled, ticking softly as heat bled away. "It responded," he said quietly. The laughter stuttered. An engineer frowned. "Responded. It failed." "It responded," Elijah repeated, "which means it's close." The CEO tilted her head, irritation flickering. "Now. You're stretching." "I'm confirming," Elijah replied. He stepped forward again before anyone could stop him. The engineer nearest him opened his mouth to object, then closed it. Something in Elijah's posture had changed. He wasn't tentative anymore. He wasn't asking permission. He reached into the engine bay and made another adjustment smaller than the last. His fingers moved with certainty, not guesswork. The room watched. Phones that had been raised to record failure hovered uncertainly now. No one wanted to miss whatever this was becoming. "Do you know how much that prototype costs?" the CEO asked, her voice sharper. "Every second you're touching it is less time you'll spend pretending it's unfixable," Elijah said calmly. That did it. A ripple of discomfort passed through the executives. One of the engineers swallowed hard, eyes locked on Elijah's hands. He'd been there when the design choices were made. He knew, suddenly, exactly what Elijah was undoing, and why. The CEO's jaw tightened. "You're very confident for someone who just failed." Elijah didn't look up. "I failed an expectation," he said, "not the engine." Silence fell again, heavier this time. Elijah stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag. He nodded once toward the console. Again. The engineer hesitated, looked at the CEO. She hesitated too, just a beat too long. Then, with a tight smile, she said, "By all means." The engine turned. The sound was different this time. Lower, smoother. Not a roar, yet, but no longer choking. The rhythm steadied, vibrations evening out like a pulse finding its pace. A murmur swept through the room. "It's holding." "That's not possible." "Check the readings." The engine ran, 10 seconds, 20. Then faltered. The silence that followed was complete. No laughter rushed in to save it this time. The CEO stared, her expression unreadable. "That's enough," she said finally. "We've indulged this long." Elijah raised a hand gently, not in defiance, in patience. 30 more seconds, he said. "Then you can shut it down yourself." The CEO opened her mouth to refuse to reclaim control, but one of the investors spoke first. "Let it run." All eyes turned. The CEO's head snapped toward him. He met her gaze evenly. "You wanted entertainment," he said. "Now I want answers." A beat passed. Then the CEO nodded stiffly. 30 seconds. The engine continued to run. Not perfectly, but undeniably alive. Elijah leaned in close, listening, adjusting nothing now, just confirming. He smiled faintly, not in triumph, but recognition. He straightened slowly. "Shut it down," he said. The engine powered off smoothly. The room exhaled as one. The CEO broke the silence with a short laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "So," she said, folding her arms. "What was that? A coincidence?" Elijah met her gaze. Steadily. "That," he said, "was the engine telling you it wants one last thing." "And what's that?" she asked coolly. Elijah glanced at the engine, then back at the room. "Permission," he said. The word hung in the air. No one laughed. No one spoke. And for the first time since Elijah had walked in, the room wasn't watching him fail. They were waiting to see if he would finish. "Permission," the CEO repeated, a short, disbelieving laugh escaping her lips. "From who?" Elijah didn't answer right away. He stepped closer to the engine again, placing his hand flat against the housing, feeling the residual warmth pulse beneath his palm. The machine had spoken clearly to him. The problem now wasn't mechanical. It was human. "From you," he said at last, to stop forcing it to be impressive. A few executives shifted uncomfortably. One investor leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the engine as if seeing it for the first time. The CEO's expression hardened. "You're saying this engine failed because we designed it too well? I'm saying it failed because no one wanted to admit restraint was smarter than brilliance," Elijah replied. "It doesn't need another fix. It needs one release." Silence spread again, thick and deliberate. An engineer swallowed. "If he's right," he murmured, "the data would—" The CEO raised a hand sharply. "Enough." She looked at Elijah, measuring him now, not as entertainment, but as a variable she hadn't accounted for. "You get one more try," she said. "One." Elijah nodded. That was all he needed. He reached for the tool again, the same one that had drawn laughter earlier. This time no one laughed. Every movement was watched too closely for that. He loosened the final restraint, barely visible, almost insulting in its simplicity. Then he stepped back. "Clear," he said. The engineer at the console hesitated. "You're sure?" Elijah met his eyes. "Yes." The CEO crossed her arms. "Do it." The ignition sequence began. The engine turned. Once, twice. Then it caught. Not with a cough, not with a stutter. With confidence. A smooth, rising hum that filled the room and settled into a powerful, steady roar. The vibrations evened out. No strain, no protest. Just balance. No one spoke. Phones lowered. Mouths fell slightly open. An engineer rushed to the monitor, eyes widening as the reading stabilized, then improved. "That's impossible," someone whispered. The engine ran stronger, cleaner than it ever had in testing. The CEO stood frozen. The smile was gone. Completely. Elijah didn't celebrate. He didn't raise his hands or look around for validation. He watched the engine like a craftsman watching a promise fulfilled. After a full minute, he lifted his hand. "Shut it down." The engine powered off smoothly, like it had been waiting for that command all along. The silence afterward was deafening. And investor stood slowly. "Run the diagnostics again," he said. They did. Numbers scrolled. Green indicators lit the screen. The room shifted. The CEO took a step forward, heels clicking sharply now, no humor left in the sound. "Explain," she said. Elijah wiped his hands calmly. "You locked the engine into perfection, no flexibility, no forgiveness. Under load, it fought itself." He looked around the room. "Engines need room to adapt. So do people." The words landed harder than any insult. The CEO opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since she'd spoken, she didn't have an immediate response. All eyes turned to her. The balance of the room had changed. The joke she'd made earlier echoed back now, ugly and exposed. "Fix this engine, and I'll marry you." No one laughed at the memory. An investor broke the silence. "How long would it take you to optimize the rest of the line?" Elijah paused. This was the moment where stories usually bent toward fantasy, where money erased disrespect. He didn't answer yet. The CEO finally spoke, voice lower. You said everyone else missed it. Why? Elijah met her gaze steadily. Because no one here was allowed to be wrong. The truth hit harder than the engine ever could. The CEO exhaled slowly. Around her the room waited, not for applause, not for mockery, but for what power would do next, now that it had been seen clearly. And for the first time that day, Elijah wasn't the one being tested. She was. Silence did not end the meeting. It exposed it. The kind of silence that followed the engine's shutdown wasn't empty. It was crowded with unspoken calculations, shifting loyalties, and the quiet panic of people realizing the rules they relied on had just changed. Elijah stood near the engine, wiping his hands slowly, deliberately. He could feel it. The room leaning away from the CEO and toward him, not out of affection but necessity. Power, he had learned, didn't love anyone. It only respected usefulness. The CEO straightened her jacket, a reflexive movement, as though fabric could restore authority. "This doesn't change the fundamentals," she said, voice measured, professional. "A single successful run doesn't rewrite the design philosophy of this company." An investor cleared his throat. "It doesn't rewrite it," he said carefully, "but it does question it." Another investor leaned forward. "We've lost 6 months. And millions trying to force this prototype into compliance." He adjusted one restraint and solved it in under an hour. All eyes drifted back to Elijah. He felt it again, that familiar moment where praise hovered, ready to be misplaced, where people decided whether to elevate the work or claim it. The CEO followed their gaze, then looked back at Elijah. "You're implying our entire engineering team was wrong." Elijah didn't flinch. "No," he said. "I'm saying they were protected from being right." That landed harder than accusation. A murmur rippled through the room. One engineer stared down at his shoes. Another crossed his arms tighter, defensive. They all understood what Elijah meant. The hierarchy. The fear of contradicting design leads. The unspoken rule that mistakes were career-ending. The CEO exhaled sharply. "Careful," she warned. "You're out of your depth now." Elijah met her gaze. "I've been out of my depth my whole life," he said evenly. "That's how I learned to swim." For a moment she said nothing. Then she turned to the investors. "We hired experts, people with credentials, with proven track records. We don't overturn process because a contractor had a lucky insight." "A lucky insight doesn't repeat," one investor replied. "This did." He gestured toward the engine. "Run it again." The CEO's jaw tightened. "We've proven it works." "Then proving it twice shouldn't be a problem." She hesitated. That hesitation, brief but visible, did something irreversible. It told everyone in the room that she was no longer deciding alone. The engineer at the console looked to her. She nodded curtly. The engine started again. And again, it ran perfectly. Numbers stabilized faster this time. Readings improved beyond projected thresholds. Someone let out a low whistle. The CEO stared at the screen, then at Elijah. "Explain it," she said again. But now the command had softened into something closer to a request. Elijah stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "You built an engine that assumes ideal conditions, perfect temperatures, perfect loads, perfect use. Real life isn't perfect." He gestured to the housing. "You constrained movement to preserve elegance, but engines aren't sculptures. They're systems under stress." One of the senior engineers swallowed. We flagged that risk early," he admitted quietly. "But it was decided the tolerances were part of the brand." The word brand hung in the air like a confession. Elijah nodded once. "That's what broke it." The CEO closed her eyes for half a second, long enough to feel, not long enough to appear weak. When she opened them, something had shifted. "Why didn't you say anything earlier?" she asked the engineer. He hesitated. "Because you didn't ask for disagreement." That was the moment the room changed sides, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. An investor stood. This isn't about the engine anymore. The CEO turned sharply. Excuse me. This is about culture, he continued. We're bleeding innovation because no one's allowed to challenge authority. And it took someone you mocked to show us that. A few people winced at the word mocked. Elijah felt the urge to step back, to let them handle their reckoning without him. But he stayed. He had learned that truth, once invited, should be fully delivered. The CEO looked at him again. Really looked. This time, not at his clothes, not at his hands, at his eyes. You could have enjoyed this, she said quietly. You could have taken your moment and humiliated us back. I didn't come here for that, Elijah replied. I came because the engine deserved better. One investor laughed softly, not mockery, but disbelief. You hear that? He said. He's talking about the engine like it's a person. Elijah didn't smile. Everything that works deserves respect. The CEO's shoulders sagged slightly. For the first time, she looked tired. What do you want? She asked him. The question landed with weight. This was the moment people like her expected a list, money, title, apology wrapped in legal language. Elijah took a breath. I want you to stop treating intelligence like it only wears one uniform, he said. I want your engineers to be allowed to be wrong without being erased. And I want credit to go where it's earned, quietly or loudly. The CEO looked away, jaw working. An investor nodded slowly. That would save us more money than any prototype. The CEO faced Elijah again. You're asking me to admit I was wrong. Elijah didn't hesitate. Yes. The word echoed. No one spoke. Then the CEO did something no one expected. She turned to the room. I was wrong, she said. The words were plain, no qualifier, no spin. Gasps rippled through the space, not because the apology was eloquent, but because it existed at all. She looked back at Elijah. And so were you, she added. He frowned slightly. About what? She held his gaze. About thinking this room would listen without being forced to. A strange, quiet understanding passed between them. An investor stepped forward. We should make him an offer. The CEO nodded slowly. We will. Elijah felt it then, the familiar tightening in his chest, the moment where opportunity tried to disguise itself as salvation. He raised a hand gently. Before you do, he said, there's something you should know. The room stilled again. I don't work well where silence is expected, Elijah continued. If you hire me, you don't get obedience. You get honesty. The CEO studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled. Not sharply, not mockingly, respectfully. That, she said, might be the most expensive thing you've asked for today. Elijah nodded once. Good, he said. The room leaned forward, waiting, because the offer was coming, and this time it wouldn't be a joke. The offer arrived dressed as certainty. It always did. The CEO folded her hands neatly on the glass table and spoke with the practiced calm of someone used to closing deals that altered lives without ever touching her own. We'd like you to stay, she said, as a senior consultant, full access, full authority over the engine program. A ripple passed through the room. Approval, relief, admiration. Someone murmured numbers under their breath, calculating what that title alone would be worth. Elijah listened without interrupting. And, she continued, eyes steady on his, will compensate you accordingly. More than fair. An investor leaned forward, eager now. This is an opportunity most people wait their entire careers for. Elijah nodded slowly, acknowledging the weight of it. He'd waited too, in garages where the lights flickered, in interviews that ended politely, in moments where he told himself next time. The CEO mistook the nod for agreement. We'll announce it today, she said. A statement. The right framing. Framing. Elijah felt the words settle like dust. Before you do, he said calmly, I need to understand something. The CEO gestured for him to continue. Is this offer because I fixed the engine, Elijah asked, or because the room watched me fix it? A few executives exchanged glances. The investor who'd spoken earlier shifted in his seat. The CEO's expression tightened. Just a fraction. Does it matter? It does, Elijah replied, because one earns trust, the other borrows it. Silence crept back in. The CEO leaned back slightly, reassessing. You think this is performative? I think this room only learned my name when the engine started, Elijah said evenly. Before that, I was a punchline. A flush crept up the CEO's neck. That's not fair. It's accurate, Elijah replied. Fair comes later, if you let it. An investor cleared his throat. Let's not overcorrect, he said carefully. We're offering respect here. Elijah looked at him. Respect doesn't arrive with paperwork, he said. It arrives with memory. The CEO's jaw tightened again. You're rejecting the offer? I'm questioning it, Elijah said. Those are different things. She studied him, really studied him now, like someone encountering a language they thought they already spoke. What would make you accept? Elijah took a breath. He hadn't planned this. He never did. Demands came easily to people who expected compliance. He had learned to measure words, because words were often all he had. I won't be the exception, he said. I won't be the proof you point to while everything else stays the same. The room went very still. An engineer near the back swallowed. He knew exactly what Elijah meant. The token. The story they'd tell to protect the structure that had nearly failed them. You want systemic change, the CEO said quietly. I want honesty to survive past today, Elijah replied. The CEO tapped her fingers once on the table, thinking. Around her, investors waited, some impatient, some intrigued. This wasn't the clean ending they'd expected. This was negotiation with stakes beyond money. Name your condition, she said. Elijah met her gaze. I don't want your title. A murmur rose immediately. I don't want to sit in meetings where people listen because of hierarchy, Elijah continued. I want a lab, independent, mixed teams, no ranks during problem solving. And when someone junior sees something wrong, they get heard, the CEO finished. Yes, Elijah said, even if it contradicts you. That last part hung there, daring her to flinch. The CEO didn't respond right away. She stood and walked slowly toward the engine, hands clasped behind her back. She stared at it like it might answer for her. When I built this company, she said finally, I swore I'd never let uncertainty slow us down. Elijah nodded. Uncertainty didn't slow you down, he said. It caught up. She turned to face him. You're asking me to dismantle the very control that got us here. I'm asking you to trade control for resilience, Elijah replied. The investors whispered among themselves now. Numbers collided with principles. Risk clashed with pride. One investor spoke up. If we do this, he said to the CEO, we do it publicly. Her eyes flicked to him. Meaning we admit the design failed because the process failed, he said, and that we changed it because we listened. The CEO closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. Do you know what that will cost me? She asked Elijah. He answered honestly, I know what it already did. That was when something in her posture shifted, not surrender, but recalibration. She returned to the table. If we do this, she said slowly, you won't be reporting to me. Elijah raised an eyebrow. I thought that was the point. You'll report to the board, she continued, and the board will report to the process. The investors exchanged looks, surprised, impressed. And the apology? Elijah asked quietly. The CEO met his eyes. You already heard it. Elijah shook his head slightly. Not for me. Her brow furrowed. Then for who? For the room, he said. For anyone who laughed. For anyone who learned today that mockery is expensive. The CEO inhaled deeply. Then she turned to the room. I mocked him, she said. I was wrong, and I used humor to protect my authority. The words hit harder this time because they were directed outward. I won't do that again, she continued, and neither will this company. A long silence followed, then someone clapped. Not loudly, not performatively, just once. Others followed. Elijah felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not triumph, not relief, alignment. The CEO faced him again. Now, she said, will you accept? Elijah considered the engine, the room, the faces that had changed, not all but enough. Yes, he said, on one condition. The CEO nodded. Name it. Elijah smiled faintly. The first hire in the new lab won't be chosen by you. She blinked. Then by who? By the people who were never asked before, Elijah said. The CEO laughed softly. No edge this time. You don't ask for small things. Elijah shrugged. Neither do engines. She extended her hand. After a moment, he took it. The room exhaled, but beneath the relief, something deeper stirred, because everyone there understood the truth now. This offer hadn't been meant for him. It had been forced into existence. And the silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was listening. The applause didn't last long. It never did. Applause was for endings. For moments people wanted to feel good about without having to change anything afterward. What followed the CEO's apology wasn't applause. It was something heavier, more uncomfortable, responsibility. The room settled into a quiet that felt different from before. Not tense, not hostile, watchful. As if everyone was waiting to see whether the words would survive contact with reality. Elijah released the CEO's hand and took a small step back. Not away, just enough to remind himself where he stood. He had learned the danger of standing too close to power. It could make you forget why you'd been invited in the first place. The CEO cleared her throat. We'll put the new structure in writing, she said, professional again, but altered. Independent lab, rotating leadership, open challenge protocol. A few engineers nodded slowly, relief visible in their faces. Others looked uncertain, calculating what this would cost them in influence. Elijah watched it all with a familiar detachment. Change, he knew, was rarely celebrated by those who benefited from the old order. An investor checked his watch. We'll need to address the press, he said. This story will leak. The CEO nodded. It should. A murmur rippled through the room. It should, someone repeated. Yes, she said. We're not bearing this. She turned to Elijah. You won't be comfortable with what comes next. Elijah met her gaze. Comfort wasn't part of the deal. She gave a small, acknowledging nod. Within the hour, the glass walls that had sealed the boardroom from the rest of the building became a stage. Employees gathered in clusters, whispers spreading faster than any official memo could. The prototype engine sat idle, but visible, a silent witness to everything that had shifted. The CEO stood at the front, posture straight, voice steady. I made a mistake, she said plainly, and I made it publicly. There was no humor in her tone, no softening language, no strategic vagueness. I mocked someone whose expertise exceeded my own, she continued, and in doing so, I revealed a problem bigger than a failed engine. Elijah stood off to the side, not spotlighted, not hidden. Present, but not paraded. This company has confused authority with intelligence, the CEO said, and today that confusion cost us time, money, and trust. A few heads bowed, others lifted, eyes sharp, listening closely. We are changing how decisions are challenged, she said, effective immediately. A hand rose from the crowd. A junior technician, nervous. What if challenging leadership still costs us our jobs? The question landed hard. The CEO didn't deflect it. Then the change failed, she said, and that will be on me. A breath moved through the room, part relief, part disbelief. Elijah felt it then, the weight of expectation shifting toward him, toward his presence. toward the idea that he was now responsible for the courage of others. He stepped forward slightly. "Let me say something," he said. The room turned. "I didn't come here to be your symbol," Elijah continued calmly. "I came to fix a problem. Symbols fade. Systems don't." He scanned the faces. Young, old, confident, uncertain. "If this only works because I'm in the room, then it doesn't work." A few people nodded. "The real test," Elijah said, "is what happens when the next person speaks up, and I'm not standing beside them." The CEO looked at him, something like gratitude flickering across her face. After the meeting broke, people approached Elijah in hesitant waves. Engineers who'd been silent before. Technicians who'd never imagined being heard. One man shook his hand too firmly, eyes shining. "Thank you," he said. "You said what we couldn't." Elijah smiled faintly. "Say it next time," he replied. "That's how it sticks." Later, alone for a moment near the engine, the CEO joined him. "You could have taken more," she said quietly. Elijah didn't look up. "I took what mattered." She studied the engine, then him. "You embarrassed me today." "I know," Elijah said. "I'm sorry." She blinked, surprised. "Not for what I said," he added. "For how public it had to be." She exhaled slowly. "That's the part I keep thinking about. I used a joke to keep control. I thought laughter meant safety." "It usually does," Elijah said. "For the people laughing." She nodded once. "I won't forget that." He turned to leave, but she spoke again. "Elijah." He paused. "You don't have to stay," she said. "You know that." He met her eyes. "I'm staying long enough to make sure the door doesn't close behind me." She accepted that without argument. As he walked out of the building later, the day felt strangely quiet. No cameras, no cheering crowd, just sunlight and traffic and the hum of a city that hadn't noticed its rules bend slightly. Elijah paused on the steps, breathing it in. Money could buy silence, titles could demand attention, but respect, real respect, cost something else entirely. It cost ego. It cost certainty. It cost the willingness to be wrong, where everyone could see it. Behind him, the building stood unchanged in glass and steel. Inside it, something fragile and new was taking root. Elijah adjusted his jacket and stepped forward into the street, knowing one thing with certainty. The engine had been fixed. Now came the harder work, keeping the room honest. Morning arrived without ceremony. No headlines blared from screens outside the building. No cameras waited at the curb. The city did what cities always did, moved on, indifferent to the quiet revolutions happening behind tinted glass. Elijah arrived early. He always did. The new lab sat on the building's lower floor, tucked away from executive offices and investor lounges. It wasn't impressive at first glance. No marble, no dramatic lighting, just long tables, tool carts, whiteboards, already scarred by erased ideas, a place meant for hands, not speeches. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, listening to the silence. Not the empty kind, the listening kind. He walked the length of the room, fingertips brushing the edge of a workbench. Yesterday's agreement was still unreal in places, like a story someone else had told him. But the rules were written now, posted, simple, clear. No rank during problem solving. Every objection recorded, not punished. Credit traced to its source. Elijah smiled faintly. Rules only mattered if people believed they would be enforced. One by one, the team arrived. A junior technician who had spoken up at the assembly meeting. A senior engineer who'd once dismissed concerns with a wave of his hand and now looked slightly unsure of where to stand. A woman from materials testing who rarely spoke in meetings, but carried notebooks full of ideas no one had read. They hesitated at the door, eyes flicking to Elijah. He nodded once. Morning. That was it. No speech, no expectations announced. The engine prototype sat at the center of the lab, panels removed, honest now. Not a monument, a question. They gathered around it. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the junior technician cleared his throat. I noticed something during the second run yesterday, he said, voice tight. The thermal curve stabilized faster than predicted. Elijah nodded. Why do you think that is? The technician hesitated, glancing around, waiting for permission that no longer needed to be given. I think the release allowed micro-adjustments we weren't modeling, he said, which means our simulations are incomplete, the senior engineer finished quietly. He looked at the technician. Good catch. The room shifted, not dramatically, subtly. The first brick moved. Hours passed like minutes. Whiteboards filled. Ideas collided and separated and reformed. When disagreements arose, they were written down, not buried. When mistakes appeared, they were examined without blame. Elijah didn't lead from the front. He asked questions, he listened, he redirected when ego crept in. By noon, the engine ran again. Better, not perfect, but honest. Upstairs, behind glass, the CEO watched. She hadn't planned to hover. It happened anyway. She stood with her coffee cooling in her hand, eyes following the movements below. There was no grand choreography, no visible hierarchy. People spoke, were challenged, adapted. It was quieter than she expected. No sharp commands, no performances, just work. An investor joined her, hands in his pockets. They're not looking at you, he observed. She didn't look away. Good. He studied her profile. You're not used to that. No, she admitted. I thought leadership meant being the loudest signal in the room. And now I'm learning that silence can be directional. He smiled faintly. Expensive lesson. She nodded. Worth it. Downstairs, Elijah stepped back as the team debated a materials change. He could feel the old instincts tugging, jump in, resolve, fix. He resisted. The point wasn't to replace one authority with another. The point was to let truth surface on its own. When the discussion stalled, he asked a single question. What would the engine choose? They stared at him, then laughed, not nervously, not defensively. Understanding dawned. They returned to the data with new eyes. By evening, word had spread through the building. People stopped Elijah in the halls, not with awe but curiosity. How did you know? Why didn't anyone else see it? Wasn't it risky to push back? Elijah answered each one honestly. I listened. I wasn't protecting anything. Yes. That night, the CEO called him into her office. Not the boardroom. Her office. She didn't sit behind the desk. She stood by the window, city lights blinking like quiet acknowledgments. They're changing, she said. Faster than I expected. They were ready, Elijah replied. They just needed cover. She turned to him. And you? Are you satisfied? Elijah considered the question. Satisfaction isn't the goal, he said. Momentum is. She nodded. I owe you something. He raised an eyebrow. You already paid. She shook her head. Not in money. She moved to the desk, opened a drawer, and removed a slim folder. I want you to see something. Inside were internal reports, memos, notes he'd never been meant to read. Patterns emerged quickly, missed warnings, dismissed concerns, the cost of jokes disguised as leadership. You're trusting me with this? Elijah asked. I'm trusting you not to let me forget, she said. He closed the folder. I won't. The days that followed didn't explode into legend. They unfolded. The engine program recovered, then advanced. Credit was shared. Quiet voices grew steadier. Loud ones learned to wait. And Elijah learned something too. That changing a room wasn't about silencing people. It was about making sure the right silence existed, the kind that listened before it spoke. Months later, at a company-wide review, the CEO stood again before the crowd. This time, there were no jokes. We fixed an engine, she said, but more importantly, we fixed how we hear each other. She paused, scanning the faces. That didn't happen because of one person. It happened because we chose not to laugh when listening was required. She didn't call Elijah forward. He didn't need to be. Afterward, as the building emptied and evening settled in, Elijah returned to the lab alone. He placed a hand on the engine housing. Warm, steady. He thought of the day he'd walked in wearing oil-stained coveralls, of the laughter, of the challenge meant as a joke. Fix this engine and I'll marry you. He smiled to himself, not bitterly. The room had never needed silence because of him. It needed silence because truth was trying to speak. And now, finally, someone had let it.